India-Portugal relations. Relations between India and Portugal began amicably in 1947 when the former achieved independence. Relations went into decline after 1950 over Portugal's refusal. By 1955, the two nations had cut off diplomatic relations, triggering a crisis that led to a war between two countries which resulted in the Indian Liberation of Goa in 1961. Portugal refused to recognize Indian sovereignty over the annexed territories until 1974 when, following the Carnation Revolution, the new government in Lisbon recognized Indian sovereignty and restored diplomatic relations. Background. Prior to Indian independence, Portugal's relations with the British Indian Empire were derived from those with the United Kingdom, set within the framework of the Anglo-Portuguese Treaty of 1373. This treaty, signed between King Edward Roman III of England and Ferdinand I and Queen Eleanor of Portugal, established perpetual friendships, unions and alliances between the two seafaring nations and is the world's oldest active treaty. This led to amicable relations, especially with regard to trade and transport between British and Portuguese colonies in the India. Commencement of relations 1947–1950. Relations between Portugal and the Indian Union were quite cordial in 1947, particularly in light of Portuguese willingness to terminate the old Padroado Treaty with the Holy See, which had traditionally given the Archbishop of Goa patriarchal authority over other parts of India. On 12 August 1948, India and Portugal exchanged diplomatic missions. Goa dispute, 1950–61. As of the creation of the Republic of India in January 1950, Portugal held a handful of territories on the Indian subcontinent, the districts of Goa, Daman and Diu, and Dadra and Nagar, Haveli, collectively known as the Estado da India. Goa, Daman, and Diu covered an area of around 4,000 square kilometers, 1,540 square miles, and had a population of 637,591. The Goan diaspora was estimated at 175,000, about 100,000 within the Indian Union. Its religious distribution was 61% Hindu, 36.7% Christian, mostly Catholic, 2.2% Muslim. The economy was primarily based on agriculture, although the 1940s and 1950s saw a boom in mining, principally iron ore and some manganese. Portugal's steadfast refusal to cede these territories caused relations with India to decline. Armed conflict commenced in December 1961. Opening of negotiations over Goa. Estrangement. By 1954, the government of India instituted visa restrictions on travel from Goa to India, which paralyzed travel between Goa and other Portuguese exclaves in India. Meanwhile, the Indian Union of Dock Workers had, in 1954, instituted a boycott on shipping to Portuguese India. Between 22 July and 2 August 1954, armed activists, variously described by some as members of United Front of Goans under the leadership of Mr. Francis Mascarenhas, supported by regular troops and reserve police forces, attacked and forced the surrender of Porch. In anticipation of this operation, India sealed the border on 28 June 1954 and prevented the Portuguese from dispatching armed forces from coastal Daman to the inland enclaves. On 30 November 1954, Antonio Salazar addressed the Portuguese Parliament, laying out the Portuguese position on Goa. Salazar dismissed India's claims to the territories as a fantasy and lauded Goans for their steadfast patriotism in the face of Indian provocations. Satyagraha movement and breakdown of negotiations. UN involvement in Goa crisis. On 14 December 1960, the United Nations General Assembly passed Resolution 1514 Roman 15 urging all countries to take steps to place their colonies and non-self-governing territories on the road to self-determination in accordance. Portugal claimed this resolution did not apply to them, as her colonies were overseas provinces, constitutionally integral to the nation, and thus exempt. On 15 December 1960, the UNGA passed Resolution 1541 laying out 12 conditions by which the UNGA would determine the definition of a non-self-governing territory. This was immediately followed by Resolution 1542 declaring that 9 Portuguese overseas provinces met these conditions and were to be considered non-self-governing territories for the purposes of Resolution 15, even if the Portuguese constitution did not recognize them as such. Indian support to partisan movements in Goa. In addition to nonviolent protests, armed groups such as Gamantak Dal Free Goa Party and the United Front of Goans conducted violent attacks aimed at weakening Portuguese rule in Goa. The Indian government supported the establishment of armed groups such as Gamantak Dal, giving them full financial, logistic, and armament support. The armed groups acted from bases situated in Indian territory and under cover of Indian police forces. The Indian government, through these armed groups, attempted to destroy economic targets, telegraph and telephone lines, road, water, and rail transport, in order to impede economic activity and create conditions for a general uprising. Commenting on the armed resistance, Portuguese Army officer Captain Carlos Azevedo, stationed with the army in Goa, states in Portuguese newspaper O Expresso, to the contrary to what is being said, the most evolved guerrilla warfare which our armed forces encountered was in Goa. I know what I'm talking about, because I also fought in Angola and in Guinea. International efforts at reconciliation. Portugal's Prime Minister Salazar, alarmed by India's hints of armed action, first asked the United Kingdom to mediate, then protested through Brazil and eventually asked the United Nations Security Council to intervene. Meanwhile, on 6 December, Mexico offered the Indian government its influence in Latin America. Meanwhile, Krishna Menon, India's defense minister and head of India's UN delegation, stated that India had not abjured the use of force in Goa and went on to link Goa to Angola, condemning Portugal's colonization policies in both cases. Indian forces were, at the time, serving in Congo as part of a UN operation and had been involved in the fighting. American diplomatic initiatives to prevent armed conflict had to balance its relationship with India and its NATO alliance with Portugal, and to dispel the idea that such initiatives were being made under pressure from the Portuguese government while avoiding NATO involvement. The U.S. government stopped short of suggesting self-determination for the people of Goa, unready to apply that policy to all other Portuguese holdings worldwide, and would damage U.S.-Portugal relations. The American ambassador to India, John Kenneth Galbraith, repeatedly requested the Indian government to resolve the issue peacefully through mediation and consensus rather than armed conflict. Nehru postponed the invasion of Goa and expressed his willingness to negotiate on the condition that Portugal first announce its intentions to withdraw from Goa. This condition was rejected by the Portuguese as contrary to the spirit of a negotiation. United States President John F. Kennedy, in a message to Nehru, argued that if India used force against Goa, this, along with its military presence in Congo, would make an otherwise Gandhian nation look belligerent. On 8 December, CSJHA, India's delegate at the United Nations Security Council, expressed India's disregard for international pressure by stating, "The invasion of Goa is a question of getting rid of the last vestiges of colonialism in India. That is a matter of faith with us, whatever anyone else may think, charter or no charter." He urged them to ensure that the situation does not deteriorate to the extent that it might constitute a threat to peace and security, and to enter into negotiations to solve the problem. Eventually, on 10 December, 9 days prior to the invasion, Nehru announced that continuance of Goa under Portuguese rule is an impossibility. The U.S. response was to warn India that if and when India's armed action in Goa was brought to the UN Security Council, it could expect no support from the U.S. delegation. Attack on the Sabarmati. On 24 November 1961, the Sabarmati, a passenger boat passing between the Portuguese-held island of Angiva and the Indian port of Kacha, was fired upon by Portuguese ground troops, resulting in injuries to the chief engineer of the boat and the death of a passenger. The action was precipitated by Portuguese fears that the boat carried a military landing team intent on storming the island. A Portuguese investigation into the matter revealed that the boat had also been fired upon 7 days earlier, when it accidentally strayed into Goan waters. The incidents fostered widespread support in India for military action. Liberation of Goa. Following the breakdown of diplomatic efforts, India conducted an armed invasion of Goa, Daman, and Diu on 18 December 1961, supported by artillery, air, and naval forces. The armed action, codenamed Operation Vijay by the Indian government, involved air, sea, and land strikes for over 36 hours. A decisive victory for India, it drove the Portuguese to surrender. Aftermath. India's annexation of Goa was met with both international support and deploration. In the years following the annexation, Portugal refused to recognize India's sovereignty over Goa. Salazar died in 1970. In 1974, a democratic government took power in Portugal and recognized India's sovereignty in Goa. The two countries signed a treaty in New Delhi on 31 December 1974, re-establishing diplomatic relations. Embassies were reopened, the Indian Embassy in June 1975 and the Portuguese Embassy in July 1975. The Portuguese government remained vulnerable and unstable until in 1987 the Social Democratic Party PSD gained an absolute majority. This introduced an era of stability, keeping bilateral interaction between India and Portugal at a low ebb. A bilateral agreement on trade, economic, industrial, and technical cooperation was signed in 1977, and a joint committee established under this agreement first met in November 1981. Increasing diplomatic contacts. Signs of improved relations included two visits of Mario Soares, one as Prime Minister to attend the 1984 funeral of Indira Gandhi and again President/Chief Guest at the Republic Day event in New Delhi in 1992. President Venkataraman in 1990 and President K.R. Narayanan in 1998 made state visits in addition to Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee for the first India-Portugal summit in June 2000. Anibal Cavaco Silva paid a state visit in January 2007, followed by the visit of Prime Minister José Socrates in December 2007. Prime Minister Antonio Costa paid yet another visit in January 2017. Parliamentary exchanges commenced in 1999 with a visit of 9 ministers from Portugal led by Dr. João Bosco Mota Amaral. Speaker of Parliament then led a 4-member delegation to the Golden Jubilee celebrations of India's Parliament on 21-25 January 2003. India dispatched a 12-member parliamentary delegation led by Manohar Joshi, Speaker of the Lok Sabha, to Portugal from 25 to 28 May 2003, and a 16-member parliamentary goodwill delegation led by Minister for Parliamentary Affairs and Information and Broadcasting, Priya Ranjan Dasmunshi, visited on 6-7 November 2007. Ministerial visits included Dr. Joa Cravanho, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, on 21-22 November 2006, Anand Sharma, Indian Minister of State MOS for External Affairs, to Lisbon from 10. Portuguese President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa is to make a 4-day visit to India. The last visit by a Portugal president to India was in 2007. Treaties and agreements. In 1997, India and Portugal split the 1977 agreement into two separate segments, one providing economic and industrial cooperation signed at Lisbon in April 2000 and the other per. Another agreement providing for avoidance of double taxation was signed in September 1998. Both these agreements had since entered into force with the completion of ratification procedures. A cooperation agreement was signed in January 1992 between the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry (FICSI) and the Portuguese Institute for Foreign Trade and Investment (ISEP). A joint business council established under this agreement met in 1993, 1995, and 1997. A cooperation agreement between Confederation of Indian Industries (CII) and the Portuguese Association of Industries (AIP) was signed in July 1995. A bilateral investment promotion and protection agreement (BIPA) and an agreement setting up a joint working group on information technology were signed in June 2000. The following agreements were signed in January 2007. Cultural Exchange Program 2007-2010. Exchange Program in the fields of education, language, science, technology, and higher education 2007-2010. Overarching Agreement in the field of education, science, culture, sports, youth, and mass media 2007-2010. Extradition Treaty. Trade and economic relations. Indo-Portuguese bilateral trade grew from US $69 million in 1991 to US $289.52 million in 2005. India's exports constituted over 70% of the turnover. Indian exports consisted principally of marine products, cotton and synthetic textiles, leather, footwear, hides and skins, staple fibers, coffee, tea, and spices. In the 21st century, exports diversified to include items such as carpets, gems and jewelry, silk and silk products, tobacco, electrical machinery and parts, iron and steel products, dyeing and tanning products, and organic chemicals. Automobile spares and components, computer software, bicycles, scooters and other two-wheelers, and rice have also been exported. Portuguese exports to India were mostly machinery and heavy equipment, 44% in 2006, with the remainder consisting mainly of cork and cork products, pulp and paper products, organic chemicals, and plastics. Return of gold ornaments by Banco Nacional Ultramarino. Following President Venkataraman's 1990 visit, an agreement was reached about the gold ornaments taken away from Goa by the Banco Nacional Ultramarino in 1961. These ornaments, deposited by the people of Goa in the Banco Nacional Ultramarino during Portuguese rule, were returned to the Indian government during the visit of Indian Minister of State for External Affairs, Eduardo Faleiro, in July 1991.